Hello and welcome to this channel. Today's going to be another anti-consumerism related video, specifically a little bit of an anti-haul themed video in which I talk about products that I am so glad I didn't buy for one reason or the other. Now, most of these items are things that I actually was a little bit tempted to get, but looking back, I am actually very glad that I didn't get for reasons that I will be detailing in this video as well. I've done similar content to this on my channel before. I believe I did like a video in which I talked about eyeshadow palettes that I was really glad that I didn't get. But these products will be a little bit more of like a broader collection of items just in general. Things from a variety of different brands that I was sort of tempted to get but decided not to, and I'm very glad that I made that decision. But with that being said, let's just get into this video and start out with the first release that I'm very glad I didn't get. That would be these quads from Makeup Revolution. These are actually the Revolution Pro quads, and I admit I was a little bit tempted when I first saw these because, first of all, the packaging is so unique, so beautiful, and the entire presentation of this selection of quads is just absolutely tempting. The colors themselves are mildly interesting. You have a little bit of different variation in terms of colorful shades versus neutral shades, and I feel like there's something in here for everybody. And initially I was actually quite tempted because of the way it was presented and the quads that were, like, the colors that were chosen, of course. However, I did see Robert Welch's video, and Robert Welch is an amazing YouTuber that I really recommend watching. He does a lot of really educational videos focusing on makeup techniques and makeup commentary and all that sort of stuff. But I do believe that he talked about these quads in one of his videos, and he talked about how he actually didn't like the quality of them. Because of the fact that I was hearing some negative feedback on these quads, I decided to sort of be a little bit happy about the fact that I decided not to get them, because I mean, if they look good, it doesn't really necessarily matter if they're not going to perform as well as you want them to. And I have tried Revolution's eyeshadows before, and I can't say that I was very happy with them. So maybe I dodged a bullet, but the packaging is definitely beautiful. Next, I'd like to talk about this entire collection from ColourPop. This reasoning could very well apply to most of the collections that ColourPop does end up launching. This particular one would be the ColourPop Making Mauves collection. And if you remember, I actually did a redesign on this eyeshadow palette on my channel. I was really happy with that redesign. I do tend to do a lot of redesigns whenever it comes to ColourPop palettes, but just in general, when it comes to so many of ColourPop's collections, they in my mind are certainly tempting. Depends on like what they're releasing, depends on the colorway, of course. Certain products in each collection do hold like a certain degree of appeal to me. But when it comes to looking at ColourPop as a whole, their brand has such a high turnover rate that so much of their products end up being forgotten or just simply swept under the rug in favor of new and more interesting launches. So I do think that the turnover rate for ColourPop is so swift that it decreases my, I would say, temptation to get their products because there's always something new and interesting. Similarly, I'd also like to talk about the Norvina Volume 1, 2, and 3 palettes. I did a video talking about all three of the palettes, and then I also did another video talking about the fourth palette they launched. But for this video, I'm just going to focus on the 1, 2, and 3 palettes. Because they are a little bit like older, so I can like talk about them in hindsight. So in my mind, they're rather large palettes, and there was a significant amount of hype based around those palettes, but I do think that they're really forgettable palettes. They were so easy to forget because I don't think that they were really anything new. Maybe new to the brand because they're definitely more colorful and they're definitely larger than your typical Anastasia Beverly Hills type palette. But at the same time, when you look at what brands are launching, having a large colorful palette is nothing new. Morphe has been doing that since like day one. So with that being said, I'm very glad that I did not succumb to the hype and that I did not get these palettes because number one, they're like $60, which is a lot of money to be spending on anything, okay, including eyeshadow palettes. But number two, they were so forgettable. It just happened so quickly, and then all of a sudden, not a lot of people are using them anymore, and I am okay with not owning them. Next, I would also like to talk about another Anastasia Beverly Hills item, and this would be their glow kits. Now, I do own one glow kit from Anastasia Beverly Hills. It's the Dream Glow Kit, and I have like a love-hate relationship with it, to be honest. I really like it, but then again, I don't use it that much. And with that in mind, I'm actually very glad that I did not succumb to the hype and that I did not get so many of the other glow kits that Anastasia Beverly Hills has offered, including the glow kits that I would have put on the screen right now. They are so many in quantity, and you have so many different colors and variations, and I have been tempted by a few of them. I'll put them on the screen as well. But in hindsight, I'm actually very glad that I didn't go ahead and get them, because highlighters, if I'm being honest, are kind of tough to get through. Bronzers are much easier to pan in my personal opinion, but highlighters, I've never gone through a highlighter. And as of now, I have so many highlighters in my collection already that it will take a while for me to get through them. And admittedly, when it comes to like just a traditional highlighter, I haven't necessarily found or tried an Anastasia Beverly Hills highlighter that I have been compelled to use nonstop over and over again. And I don't want to try and get another glow kit to try and make that happen when I'm really not in the mood, if that makes any sense. So I am very glad I did not succumb to the hype that much when it comes to the Anastasia Beverly Hills glow kits, because I did end up saving a lot of money, and I would have just had like a whole bunch of palettes just lying unused in my collection. Next, let's talk about Huda Beauty. She launched 3 of these pastel type palettes, the Pastel Obsessions palettes. Like with the mauve palette from ColourPop, I did do redesigns on all 3 of these palettes. And I do like my redesign so much more than the actual original palettes, but I was slightly tempted by the inclusion of several key matte pastel shades in these palettes. Was I tempted for that long? No, not really. And once I did my redesign, I was kind of like desensitized by the palettes, and I wasn't necessarily interested in the palettes anymore after I had done my redesign. But the thing that prevented me from getting these palettes was definitely the fact that they had so like many neutral shades in there mixed in with the pastels. And when I did my redesign, I actually eliminated a lot of those shades and replaced them with colorful shades. And admittedly, my redesign did prevent me from actually getting this palette, because I looked at my redesign and I was kind of like, I like this better than the original palette, so I don't even want to get the original palette because that would just be unappealing for me. So I'm very glad that I didn't get these, because like with so many other makeup releases, people were like initially kind of interested in these, and then they kind of like just dropped off, and now nobody's talking about them. Also, the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe Volume 2 palette. Now, I do believe that I did do a video talking about anti-hauling this palette, and I did give a few alternatives to this palette that I sourced from my own makeup collection. But I will say this, when I initially saw Jaclyn Hill's video talking about this palette, when I saw her swatching all the colors, and when I saw people's looks with this palette, I was definitely tempted to get it myself, because Jaclyn Hill has this way of really making you want to buy whatever she's launching, and this was no exception. I was definitely tempted. I wanted this palette, I will say that, for about 2 seconds. But in hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't get this palette, because I do think that when Jaclyn Hill had her initial palette with Morphe that she launched, that palette was at the time so well loved and so big that it's kind of difficult to mimic that even with a continuation of that initial palette, because we've already been exposed to pinks and warm tones and colorful shades already, and so it's nothing new, it's not as revolutionary, and it's just not as interesting. So I'm glad that I didn't get this, because to be honest, I have alternatives, and I can't say that people are as enamored by this palette as they were with the first one. So it's kind of, it's kind of like a lackluster release, if I do say so myself. The next 2 items are things from Jeffree Star Cosmetics, and I personally only own 1 item from Jeffree Star Cosmetics. I don't necessarily go out of my way to purchase from the brand, but whenever Jeffree Star comes out with an item, I am in some capacity tempted to get it because of the way he presents his items, because of the way he talks about them. And when it came to the Blue Blood palette and the Blood Sugar palette, those are two so very iconic palettes that for a while I was definitely tempted to get them and I was very drawn to them. In hindsight, I kind of look at the ratio between neutrals and colorful shades within these two palettes, and I do know that a lot of the shades in both of these palettes would have gone unused, and regardless of how beautiful the packaging is, regardless of how amazing the quality is when it comes to these shadows, if I can't use a vast majority of the palette, I'm simply not going to find myself getting it. And in hindsight, I kind of look at the shades that I have in my collection today, and I look at what I have, and I look at how much I love the items that I already own in my collection that are quite similar to these palettes. And I'm glad that I saved the money and didn't get these items, because in the end, I'm very happy with what I already have, and I already do have so many versions of blues, purples, reds, pinks in my collection that I do prefer much more than I could ever like these. Another thing would be a little bit of an older item, and I'm talking about some Lorac palettes. I'm talking about the very large Pro palettes that they had. I have the original Pro 1 and the original Pro 2, but for a time Lorac was promoting these ginormous palettes that they would release, I think, for the holidays. And they were super popular. They would sell out super quickly and everybody wanted them. And I did not necessarily make any attempt to get them because I don't think I could afford them at the time. But at the same time, I was actually very tempted to get them. But in hindsight, I'm very glad that I didn't, because A, those palettes were enormous, and B, how many shades of neutral brown do you really need? You know what I mean? And it would have made no difference if they were colorful, because honestly, at this point in time, I really only need like small curated versions of eyeshadow palettes, and that's it, because I find myself more inspired by those things. I find myself more motivated to experiment with different color combinations from different palettes and just different brands and things, and just mix and match. And I would have basically bought that item, spent a lot of money on it, and it would have remained unused in my collection. And in hindsight, very glad that I didn't get any of the large Lorac Pro palettes. Very glad indeed. It just goes to show that hindsight is 20/20. Tastes change, preferences change. The public perception of products definitely does change as well, and I have for a very long time very much preferred to have other people test out products first before I actually put down the money to buy something, because I'm able to be less disappointed when it comes to getting the products that I really spent a lot of money on. So this definitely motivated me to sort of look at new makeup releases in a different light, to look at them a little bit more objectively, and to really just appreciate what I already have in my makeup collection. So thank you for watching until the end of this video. I do hope you enjoyed it and found it interesting, and I will see you next time. Bye!